Hey everyone, my name is Eli Smith, and today we're going to be talking about the application of the health behavior model in condom use among male clients and sex workers in India. So, the health behavior model, before we really get into it, let's go ahead and talk about it. The health behavior model was developed in the 1950s by scientists at the US Public Health Service to explain people's failure to adapt to new strategies or commit to new disease screenings. Later on, it would also be used to help explain issues with treatment compliance. The core of health behavior model revolves around an individual's beliefs. An individual's beliefs regarding a health topic and their beliefs of the treatment can both influence adoption of behaviors regarding that health topic. This model additionally pulls from psychological and behavioral theory, and that people have an innate desire to avoid illness or to get well if already ill, and that their actions can be influenced if they believe any particular action can stop them from getting sick in the first place. So I won't go and spend too much time here, but since we've already gone over this paper, but we'll do a quick review. The purpose of the study was to increase the overall amount of safe sex had among Indian sex workers and their male clientele, as well as to increase positive public perception towards condom use. This would be achieved through advertisements and local and personal engagement in 100 regions identified as being heavy sex worker/HIV load regions, and would be monitored through health surveys performed both before and after the intervention. The study was broken into multiple steps: planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, which were then further divided into additional steps. The steps that we'll focus on here are the understanding of determinants and program creation steps. In these steps, the creators identified clear determinants that were associated with consistent condom users versus inconsistent users, and then created messages based off ideas associated more strongly with consistent users. The positive beliefs were most heavily associated with consistent condom use are as follows. 1. Condoms won't burst if used correctly. 2. Condoms won't slip off if used correctly, therefore there is no need to worry. 3. No matter what choices you make, you always need a condom in commercial sex work. 4. No matter which sex worker you choose, you always need a condom. First, let's begin addressing our question. Let's look at first of the core components, susceptibility. This again is when a person engages in an activity such as having sex with a sex worker, how likely they are to contract a disease if no countermeasures are taken. And in this study, we can see hints of perceived susceptibility in the 4 beliefs, and that they state in 2 of them that regardless of which sex worker you choose to have sex with, you always need a condom. However, there's no instances where the beliefs of disease contracture from engaging in sex in our final analysis. So in the end, because of this lack of perceived susceptibility in these beliefs, I would say that this component is not well supported by this study. And that for the most part, all of the beliefs revolve around how safe it is if you were to use a condom, as well as how safe a condom were to be if used appropriately. Next, we have perceived severity. And in the case of perceived severity in the study, it would be the avoidance of severe disease states such as HIV, acting as a deterrent from engaging in risky sexual behavior. Unlike the component of perceived susceptibility, perceived severity played a larger role for a portion of the population. Interestingly, though, this was only the case for the Maharashtra region. In this region, perceived severity had an odds ratio of 2.74. However, since this only occurred in one region, it was not pursued as a determinant so that the conductors could simplify the message across multiple regions. While it was not a final determinant, I would say that the idea of perceived severity did receive some level of support in this study. However, based on the fact that it is not a final determinant, I would say that it is also poorly supported, even if more so than perceived susceptibility. Perceived benefits in this regard is a rather broad term. Positive beliefs were the strongest determinant of consistent condom use, with an odds ratio of 5.12. And as a result, this was the primary area that was addressed through subsequent media, theater, and interpersonal events. The four primary beliefs that were associated with consistent condom use were: 1. Condoms won't burst if used correctly. 2. Condoms won't slip off if used correctly, therefore there is no need to worry. 3. No matter what choices you make, you always need a condom in commercial sex. And 4. No matter which sex worker you choose, you always need a condom. Now, these beliefs have a lot of undertones mixed in, but I would argue that the most prevalent is that of condoms are good to use and they are protective in commercial sex. Given this, I would say that of each of these components we've looked at so far, perceived benefits is represented most heavily in this study, especially given that the overall goal is to change how these individuals approach their health behavior in regards to sex workers. Finally, we look to support perceived barriers. In this paper, there is not a large amount of support for this component. When one looks at perceived barriers in the setting of increasing condom use, you should look towards things like access and knowledge regarding condom use. In this instance, one of the largest barriers to access would be those of social norms and other stigma surrounding the purchase of condoms. However, in this study, it was seen that conformers and non-conformers across all regions were exposed to the same societal standards. As such, I would say that they didn't really address the perceived barriers and their role in the formation of the study. You could argue that because they addressed these social norms and how they are the same, that they did attempt to tackle perceived barriers. However, it's more of a sidestepping of the question rather than actually addressing it in the health behavior model. So, with all of this, does the health behavior model fit? So let's look at our model and see if we can push and pull it to fit this study. First, it's important that we talk about some of the limitations of the model. Some of these limitations are that the health behavior model does a poor job of accounting for other determinants like individual attitudes and beliefs. It also doesn't take into account the habits of the individuals or the social acceptability of the change. In this case, it would be the social acceptability of condom use. In the setting of this study, only perceived benefits fit well when we looked at the positive beliefs, and even these were not a perfect example, as the positive beliefs were very muddy in how they were phrased. We did see an increase in condom use that was associated with perceived severity of HIV. However, this was only in the Maharashtra province and was omitted from the final study. The other two components, perceived susceptibility and perceived barriers, played very little role outside of extrapolation. You could say that they addressed perceived barriers in their commentary on social norms. However, it's more likely that they really just stepped around the issue rather than tackling it, like they had with positive beliefs. They do this so that they can focus on what will be more effective for the largest amount of people as quickly as possible, and it's understandable why they left this out. Now, if we look at this model from a zoomed out perspective, we're attempting to change individuals' beliefs regarding a certain action. Specifically, through these individual interactions, we attempt to persuade the population that condoms are beneficial and protect the wearer from HIV. On this level, the health behavior model makes sense, but for me, it does not provide enough support. So after all this, I would say that no, the health behavior model does not fit this paper very well. Instead, it would be more useful in looking at groups of people individually in their process of making decisions in their own personal spectrum, rather than looking at groups on the magnitude of countrywide interventions, where collecting that amount of data would prove to be a very difficult task. Instead, I believe that the health behavior model would fit in a far more granular study where you look at the individuals rather than the populations. So let's look at some other models and see if we might be able to find one that could fit this study a little bit better. First, we have the social cognitive model. This model involves interactions between the person learning a behavior, their environment, and the behavior in question. The goal of this model is to understand how people can regulate their behavior through control and reinforcement of certain behaviors. In this regard, you could say that this study supports this in their approach to changing behavior regarding condom use. Involves changing of their environment, theater performances, and media, which would directly impact how these individuals internalize these behaviors. As a result, I would say that this theory could provide a strong jumping off point for this study, as you don't have to look at the individual. Instead, you can focus it more on the intervention. Next, we have the trans-theoretical model, which states that individuals move through 6 stages when adapting a new behavior: pre-contemplative, contemplative, preparation, action, maintenance, and termination. Most of the time, people actually never make it to termination, so it's very commonly considered a 5-step model. Given these stages, I would say that this model would be another poor choice for analysis of this paper, as they didn't look at the individual spectrums that each of these people fell on. Instead, the trans-theoretical model would best be applied to individuals rather than large groups like this, similar to the health behavior model. Then we have the theory of planned behavior, which is a theory that aims to predict when someone will engage in a behavior through analyzing one's motivations and abilities. There are 6 components to this theory that govern an individual's control over any certain behavior: attitudes, behavioral intention, subjective norms, social norms, perceived power, and perceived behavioral control. When looking at these individual components, a few of them are exemplified here in this study, such as attitudes and social norms, but then we run into similar issues as the health behavior model, and that you begin to have to extrapolate other components in order to get them to fit just a little bit better. In terms of fitting models to the study, I wouldn't go with this one as my first choice, as it would take a good bit of work to really make each of these components fit to this study. So out of each of these, I would personally choose to go with the social cognitive model to describe the study, as it mostly addresses the actions which the study creators took to change the behavior, and you can approach it through that unique lens. Otherwise, you're more restrictive in looking at models which are more individualized to persons. They become difficult to approach when you start to look at the massive scale that this study is conducted at. Then, some things that could be done differently. The first thing that I would start with in changing the study to better address the health behavior model specifically would be to really pull out the individual determinants of the study. For the most part, the only determinant that received a large amount of examination was that of positive beliefs. These determinants could be extrapolated to individual beliefs in our core components of susceptibility, severity, benefits, and barriers. Rather than addressing one aspect, attempt to address each of these, and then comb back through in follow-up interviews differences in perception towards these components in your newly consistent users. This would require for the study to become further fleshed out with more micro-intensive work, increasing the granularity of the information collected. Thankfully, this would be well suited to a follow-up study given all the work that has already been done in this area. So it could be easier to address these behavior models and could be important for determining different areas that could show potential for improvement. Here's the references that I used for this, and thank you so much. Have a good night.